Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with another Apple event on the horizon. Less than 2 weeks to go. And I think a lot of the same questions are on people's minds because obviously, whenever the event is announced, we have our formal, announcement video where we kind of go over some of the rumors and leaks, which already sounds like some of which are not going to happen. Ross Young juking us all out. It feels like, I don't know, lately some of these reports they just I don't know if they're making stuff up or they say things way too soon in order to generate more clicks. I feel bad because I did a video because Ross Young has gotten a lot of things right in the past and it felt somewhat last minute, but Ross Young said a couple days ago that the mini LED was coming to the iPad Air larger size, and now this morning he said, actually, never mind. And I'm like, I really don't want to believe that they're making stuff up just to generate clicks, but they're probably reporting things way too soon if it's still possible for there to be this many last minute. Actually, never mind. You know what? It's not going to have that. But following the announcement, I usually like to do a live stream just to gauge what the community's most curious about when it comes to Apple's next event. What are they going to focus on, and what do you guys want more things addressed? Good morning, everybody. Thanks for Nicholas. Composimple Snorsadiel from Norway. Wow. Gustavo, Marngel, Andy K, Micah Galibo? Galibo. Sorry, I'm butchering everybody's names. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. But yeah, that's what both of the Tailosive Tech Pro member questions were kind of addressing similar concerns with the iPad. Maybe I'm biased because I've been fairly critical on the iPad over time, and so the people who agree with me are more likely to support or watch. But Marngel says, you think Apple knows that the iPad hardware is overkill for the software it supports, or you think Apple is delusional enough to genuinely believe that iPadOS does make good use of the silicon in it? And then Alpha asking, will Apple finally fix the iPad this year? So almost the same question when you think about it. Most people have the same concern of like, okay, the problem is not with the hardware, which is primarily why I think people have a hard time getting excited for new iPad hardware. Also, Symphony, I know I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but thank you for joining Tailosive Tech Plus. I appreciate that. Thank you. iPadOS 18 will prove me wrong about iPadOS. I want to be proven wrong, just so everybody's clear. I would absolutely love it if Apple just totally revamped iPadOS and made it super functional and made sure that, a lot of people will ask me on Twitter and stuff like, well, what exactly is the problem? They want to simplify it. And to me, that's the problem, is it's not just one simple fix. It's not, well, just do this and suddenly the iPad is now more of a pro machine. Now it's more capable. No, it's literally like hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny little features that all stack up. It's not one little thing, which is why my quickest solution has been just allow it to dual boot Mac OS if it has a keyboard and trackpad. And of course, everybody said, Drew, they're never going to do that. Stop asking for them to do that. Just if you want a Mac, buy a Mac. Okay, I did. That's why I don't have an iPad anymore. I've heard those messages. I've received them and just accepted that, okay, I guess I'm a Mac guy and the iPad is not for me because so much of what the iPad can do, I can already do on my phone. And if I want to have a larger screen or a more expensive device that's capable of being more productive, then a Mac is just going to fit my use case so much better. And I guess the iPad is specifically for people who need an Apple Pencil for certain things. And that's just not me anymore. I just don't take enough notes because I don't go to school and I don't do enough artistry. I mainly used to use it for making video thumbnails, but that was primarily so I could mask out subjects. And once iOS Subject Lift came out, and on my phone now, I can just highlight the subject of any picture and lift them into whatever background I need. That basically killed all functionality of the iPad. I sold my iPad. I do not own an iPad anymore. Just so everybody's aware. I know that there's a bunch of older viewers coming back because I don't know why they're coming back, but I see the effect is suddenly I'll get a bunch of comments all at the same time that go, whoa, you lost a bunch of weight. I haven't seen your videos in years. I'm like, oh, okay. So we have like a 2018 or 2020 viewer that's now coming back after all these years. Welcome back if you haven't been watching for a while. But yes, in case you were gone for a while, I sold my iPad, I sold my Apple Watch. I'm an essentialist. I just want to hold on to the hardware that I absolutely need and utilize. It's not a financially motivated thing. It's purely just a intentional thing. I don't want to keep hardware that I don't use or don't need, and that's primarily why I didn't keep my Apple Vision Pro. Yes, the price is pretty high, and that didn't help, but my point with the whole Vision Pro review was, even if this was a $1,000 device, even if you gave me an Apple Vision Pro for free, it's very likely that it would sit on my desk collecting dust after a few weeks. And I've been hearing other Apple Vision Pro buyers share similar experiences. And I'm going to address the Tailosive Tech Pro comments, but Neem also just super chatted. Good morning, Drew. My AI pin comes Thursday. I'm so excited. Sold my MacBook and iPhone in anticipation of minimalism. Will only be using iPad and AI pin. I really hope you're joking. Really hope you're joking. But if not, good luck. I hope this helps reduce your screen time. But thank you for the super chat. That's very kind of you. I do not think the AI pin is a good product from everything I've seen, but that's just me. You do you. If you enjoy it, I'm happy for you. Enjoy your $700 chest heater that costs $24 a month and can't do very much. So far, the only exciting rumor for iPadOS is there will finally be a calculator app. Hope Apple doesn't software lock it for some dumb reason. Okay, he's not joking. Well, I don't know why you want to tell me these things. If you've watched any of my videos or podcasts, you know very well how I feel about the AI pin. So I don't know if you're trying to get a reaction out of me or look for approval from me. You're not going to get approval from me. You're not going to get me going, hey, good job. I'm glad you bought an AI pin, because I think it's just a horrible product. And I feel like I've been pretty clear on that. Ever since it came out, I've been saying it's a dumb idea and I don't think it's going to go very well. So unless you just didn't watch any of that content and are hoping that I'll suddenly be excited because there's just a shiny new Apple, not even Apple product, just a shiny new tech product that costs a lot of money. I'm just saying $24 a month for, something slightly smarter than Siri is not a good deal in my opinion. Also, you can get cell phone service for way less than $24 a month. Mint Mobile starts at $15 a month. Everybody I know in my personal life is using the base Mint Mobile plan, and they're totally fine with it. They just use Wi-Fi, and cell service is kind of secondary. Drew will buy one for work and then return it as soon as the review is out. I know a lot of people are memeing the whole return thing. But what's more, and that's fine, you can meme it. Oh, Drew doesn't keep things. That's fine. I'm okay being associated as the return guy. But what I think is far more damaging and probably a lot more scary / dangerous for the consumer market, especially because I know there's a lot of younger viewers watching, is this association that you're not a real tech reviewer unless you buy and keep everything. In reality, I think that sets a really dangerous precedent of people buying a bunch of stuff they don't need, and simply because they made 1 or 2 review videos on it, they now have to keep it. That's how you get yourself in way more debt, and that's how you make far more reckless financial decisions, is to buy up a bunch of stuff that you probably don't utilize. I was hoping to inspire, or at least set kind of a standard for a lot of my audience, that because I didn't feel like I needed my Apple Watch or I didn't need my iPad, I'm going to make sure I'm not going to sell it for a massive profit. In fact, the friend I sold my Apple Watch to wanted to pay more for it, and I said, no, it's not about the money. I just wanted someone to have it that would utilize it and would appreciate it. And I think that consumer debt and people spending money on things they don't need is a huge problem, not just in this country, but in the world, and a problem that a lot of tech YouTubers probably perpetuate. They convince you all the time that you need to buy this latest thing, or that, oh yeah, my MacBook and my Apple Watch and my iPhone and my AirPods and my Apple TV, that's not enough. I also need a product that's between the MacBook and the iPhone, that's a touchscreen, And that little middle grade product serves some kind of use case when in reality, a lot of the time it might just sit there collecting dust, and you're trying to justify the expense, and you're trying to change the way you live your life to justify spending more money on the latest tech product because it's a slightly new color or it has some new feature that's cool for 2 seconds and then you stop using it. To me, it's that attitude that people seem to just be comfortable with and just assume all tech YouTubers or all tech creators. It doesn't have to just be on YouTube, it could be on Twitter or whatever. Everybody's just supposed to go out and buy all the latest stuff and keep it, even if it collects dust and they don't utilize it. And oh, by the way, I found my old Mac under the couch or under the bed. It's like, that's not smart. That's not a wise use of finances. And that money could be used supporting better things. I think that, and I did keep the 15 Pro, but if you remember the reason I justified that, I didn't feel good about buying it really because I was like, yeah, I don't really need a lot of the tech, but I mainly wanted an iPhone because I knew that with a lot of my traveling and a lot of my trips, I was going to be recording videos on my phone anyway. And I wanted a phone that had Type C. So I was heavily considering switching to Android just so that I could plug my microphone directly into the phone. And no matter which adapters and cables I tried, I couldn't do that with any Lightning iPhone. I really like the 13 mini. My friend just bought one and he's been using it and he let me play around with it for a while and just like, man, that iPhone mini, iPad mini's pretty cool too, but the iPhone mini was such a great form factor, such a great size, but I really just have benefited immensely from being able to plug in my Zoom microphone straight to the iPhone. That just simplifies my workflow and my editing and my travel plans so much more, to not have to fuss around with SD cards and importing and video and audio and syncing them up. That when you do 3 videos a day, the past 2 days, actually, I've done 3 videos a day. So that's like 6 videos over the course of 48 hours. And sometimes I'm cranking out more reviews or more videos faster when there's more news. It just really, really helps to simplify. And I must say that the 15 Pro as a tool, specifically as just an iPhone with Type C, has been very, very useful having that AirDrop built in and having the USB-C compatible with my microphone. And I still go back and forth. I probably should have gone with the regular iPhone 15, but part of me was like, yeah, but I already reviewed the regular 15, so I don't get to do more content. I already told people I would try out the 15 Pro eventually anyway. But yeah, seriously, and it was during the holiday return window. So near the end of that holiday return window, I seriously considered returning the 15 Pro, but it was literally just getting so busy. There was all this family stuff going on, and I didn't want to, go through the process of returning it. And I figured that the 15 Pro review videos I got out of it kind of made up for the difference, but I didn't like the precedent that it set. And I think a lot of tech YouTubers perpetuate that buying behavior that you should just buy everything that comes out, even if you don't plan on utilizing it, even if it's not useful, you should keep it anyway. I don't like that. I get that everybody likes memeing the "you'll return it" thing, but I mean, with over the course of 5 or 6 years, I did the math once on a live stream. I spent like over $30,000 on Apple products. So I found it funny how no one really bats an eye on that. It's like, wow, you spent $30,000 on like laptops and phones and tablets. That's not a big deal because you're a tech YouTuber. Okay, that's to be expected. But if someone starts returning things because they don't think they're going to need them, that gets ridiculed. People make fun of that. people hold that against you. It's like, what are we perpetuating here? I couldn't convince my family to switch to Mint, so everyone I know pays a lot for carrier service. I know not everybody likes the limited data plans, but I would still recommend Visible if you are more of an unlimited data person. Visible is far cheaper than pretty much everybody else. But yeah, to go back to the main questions on the Tailosive Tech Pro members, I think that Apple probably knows that the silicon is overkill. I don't think they personally believe that the iPad OS is taking full advantage of that silicon, probably because a lot of the silicon they're putting in the iPads, they also put into devices with active cooling systems, like MacBook Pros that have fans, and the iPads just have never had fans. So they're well aware that the chips they're putting in the iPads are not really being utilized to their full potential. They're also in much thinner devices, which don't have as great a heatsink technology. So the chips have to be limited from the hardware level in order to function in the iPad and keep the battery life somewhat reasonable. And of course, they can't overwork them because they can't cool them down actively. Very thin products. But I think that it's more about manufacturing efficiency as to why Apple puts these advanced, very, very capable, very fast M series of chips into the iPads. Like, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for them to put, a different chip in between the A17 chip and in between the M3 chip. Now we're going to have A17X in the middle. No, that's just a little too complicated, and the iPad is big enough to accommodate for the same kind of chips that they can fit in a Mac Mini or a MacBook Air. So they might as well just put in the same chips because they're so similar. It doesn't make sense to waste the R&D and the manufacturing expense to build some kind of in-between chip. So that's partly why I think they're going to be putting M3 chips in iPad Pros, even though what is the iPad really going to do? I mean, there's probably some gaming arguments they can make now that the M3 has hardware accelerated ray tracing that maybe doesn't work as well on a Mac because Mac OS is just known for not having that great of a game catalog, whereas the iOS App Store, which is shared on the iPad and iPhone ecosystem, maybe that is more likely to take advantage of the game support because, the iPad Pros have soon they'll have OLED, but yeah, much better displays than are currently in the MacBook Air. They also have ProMotion, so they have high refresh rate displays, and they're more likely to be entertainment and media focused devices than the MacBook is, which is more productivity focused, which is why I've still occasionally heard many people say things like, why does the MacBook need a ProMotion display? It's kind of overkill. Most people aren't going to be playing that many games on it anyway. With the iPad, the argument is a bit more focused on, well, okay, it might have a bit more of a gaming emphasis. So having that hardware accelerated ray tracing kind of makes sense. But yes, I do use my iPhone to stream. The camera you're viewing me on right now is the iPhone 15 Pro with continuity camera with my Mac. Again, another feature that I can do on Android, but it's just not as smooth. It's not as seamless. There's usually more watermarks involved, and it's not as stable of a connection. There's no cable plugged into my iPhone right now. This is just a wireless signal going straight into the MacBook, and then the MacBook is handling the audio. I'm using the onboard microphone on my Mac. So it's a fantastic setup that is honestly very hard to beat outside of the Apple ecosystem. And most of my channel revenue comes from the EV channel now. So I'm kind of building my tech ecosystem around how does this help me make better electric vehicle content? And the iPhone has been immensely useful at filming car stuff. Because usually I've tried to film car stuff with my Blackmagic camera and with regular cameras in the past. There's just so much more variables. Like, I'm not alone in this, by the way. This is why Marquez, he has his fancy car reviews occasionally, but he made a separate autofocus channel where pretty much the entire channel is shot on smartphones. It's most of the time an iPhone or occasionally a Pixel or a Galaxy or something. But he even expressed when he created that channel that smartphones make it really, really easy for you to just focus on the car, because when you go inside the car, the lighting's very different from when you're outside the car, and when you're showing the interior space, you can't fit in as big a camera setup or as many people. So having a small camera that has really good dynamic range with decent audio that you can zoom to ultra wide, and then from far away you can zoom in. Just the iPhone camera and smartphone cameras in general are so good at being able to document car experiences. And I've done factory tours, I've done prototype test drives, I've done meetups with people, and just having a great camera like that is really, really helpful for that line of work. If I was more of a freelance videographer that was filming weddings or commercials for people, no, I don't think an iPhone would be a good fit for the job. Even if the iPhone cranked out good videos, it's just not a good look. I have family members that do freelance videography, and if you're hiring someone, if you're paying someone to do video work for you, they're not going to want to see you pull out a smartphone. Like, that just doesn't make them feel good. Like, what am I paying you for? You're just using a phone. I could do that. So even if the performance of the phone is really good, it's just a better look if you're a freelance videographer to actually have professional equipment, because then the customer feels like they're getting special treatment. They're getting someone that goes a little bit above and beyond to make sure that the quality is just that good. But yeah, I think Apple's well aware. All of that to come back to, Apple's well aware that the hardware is overkill in the iPad, but I think this all comes back to the title of the stream. The iPad has an identity crisis, and it's kind of... Oh, that's weird. Why is he... I didn't know that if someone's calling me as I'm live streaming, I get a notification on the Mac and not from the phone. I wonder why he wants to... I don't know how to answer it. I tap the notification. For some reason, it's not coming through on my Mac. Sorry, Randy. I hope... I hope I'm not... Is the camera still working? Hang on a second. Yeah, okay. That still works. I hope he didn't need anything. Text me. I have iMessage open. You can text me if that was intentional or not. Neem super chatted. The U.S. Department of Transportation now requires airlines to give passengers automatic cash refunds where their flights are canceled. That's great. That's awesome. That's actually a rare federal government win. Most of the time, the federal government makes a bunch of stupid decisions, but I actually agree with that one. There's way too much airline price gouging going on. Marquez used the iPhone and the mic. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, there's a few things. They also banned non-compete clauses, which I think is good. I know several people personally that have been affected by non-compete clauses, and those have now been eliminated. Ban / existing contracts have now expired, I believe. So you can't force someone to not compete with you if you depart the company in any way, which very close friends I have had to sign non-compete clauses, and they always felt a little icky and a little weird to me. I was always surprised that a company could do that. Now I'm kind of grateful that they can't do that, but I personally don't think that this year at DubDub or at the Let Loose event, Apple is just going to suddenly fix all of our problems with the iPad. You know, the calculator is just one problem. It's kind of the easy one to mock because it's so simple, it's so basic. No, I don't think that adding a calculator to the iPad will magically make it a pro-focused device, but it was just an easy, like, basic thing to point to as such, like a... iPadOS is so limited, it's so behind everybody else, it doesn't even have a calculator app. So it's low-hanging fruit, obviously. I don't think that was really preventing anybody from switching over to an iPad or something. It's... fruit, no pun intended. It's an easy thing that they can add, so I'm glad that they're rumored to be adding it. I hope it ends up being true, but no, that doesn't solve all of our problems. In the same way that I feel like iPads should have optimized battery charging. They should have had that years ago. It's shocking to me that Apple has optimized battery charging on AirPods, on iPhones, Apple Watches, and Macs. Pretty much on everything except the iPad. That's the one thing that doesn't have optimized battery charging. And it's such a basic feature. So again, it's not like, okay, if they add optimized battery charging, I will no longer complain about all of the real problems of iPadOS, like the limited app support, the Final Cut and Logic apps that they put on there being so substantially limited compared to their Mac counterparts, making them subscription only instead of buyout, which is an amazing deal on the Mac. I'm kind of surprised Apple hasn't switched to a subscription-only model for their Pro apps. But I'm grateful that they haven't. It seems like the kind of thing Apple would do these days. With Adobe having such a subscription focus for years now, it feels like for the past decade, maybe longer than a decade, Adobe has switched over to the whole Creative Cloud concept, so you can't buy Adobe apps one time anymore. Whereas Apple is still letting people buy the Pro Apps bundle for education, which is like $200, and you get Final Cut and Logic and Motion and Compressor and all this stuff. We'll get the charge limiter on legacy iPhones, MacBooks, and AirPods, and then optimized battery charging will show up on the iPad. Yeah, it feels like, and I've had people inside Apple tell me this is true, that there's not a designated iPadOS team, which is kind of why I joke in my videos about like iPadOS team. What are you talking about? There is no team. They don't do anything. Um, it sounds like there's an iOS team, of course, that is very focused on making sure that the iOS is stable and getting new features and backwards supported so that even older iPhones run relatively stable. But of course, they make mistakes. Software is a very underappreciated, underrated, and very difficult thing to get right. And to bug fixing is extremely complicated. And I think most people don't understand how complicated software is. So, of course, it's difficult for Apple to get everything right with iOS, but relative to how complicated it is and how many devices it runs on and how long it lasts, iOS is pretty stable relatively. And there's just a few people on the iOS team that occasionally have to get iPadOS to catch up with all of the features that they're working on with the regular iOS team, which is why it often feels like the iPadOS team, or the lack of, iPadOS gets iOS hand-me-down features. So we'll see a bunch of new features and perks come to iOS, and then not all of those things are brought to the iPad, and then a year goes by, and now what does iPadOS get? Oh, it gets the things that iOS got like a year ago. It feels like that because there's not really a designated team of people working on iPadOS. There's just a big iOS team, and occasionally a segment of that team has to get iPads to catch up. Whereas there is a watchOS team. There is a team of software engineers that just focus on watchOS and nothing else. There is a macOS team, a bunch of software engineers that just work on macOS and nothing else. Probably even the same thing with tvOS to a certain extent. But is there an iPadOS team? Not really. There's just a segment of the iOS team that goes, oh yeah, we have to catch this up. Because I think Apple's probably, still doing layoffs and freezing on new hires right now, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So it's never really going to feel like the iPad really gets its moment to shine in regards to software, because Apple fundamentally views the iPad as like a separate category from the Mac, and it cannot do everything the Mac can do. And they just, as long as they have that barrier in their mind that if I request that the iPad should do something my Mac can do, they just go, no, it's an iPad, it shouldn't do that. It's never really going to fix all of my complaints with it. It's never really going to resolve all my issues with it. And that's okay, for the record. I'm not saying Apple's doomed or the iPad is doomed if they don't listen to me. I just think it's a big missed opportunity for the iPad to become much more capable, because I think there would be demand and a lot of public interest in a super capable Apple 2-in-1 device that could be a tablet and a fully functional laptop. We definitely see a lot of interest in that in the Windows community. A lot of people love their Surface Pro devices because it can be a touchscreen, it can do note-taking, it can do drawing and artwork, but it can also be a fully functional laptop that has access to all the same things as a normal Windows PC would. And I think Apple could compete in that space, and they're probably just more insistent on, well, it's better off if we just sell them a Mac and an iPad. But I think the whole reason the iPhone is such a big success, and the reason the iPhone is so popular, is because it combines the functionality of so many devices all in one. You got your internet communicator, you got a cell phone, you got your music player, you got your camera, you got your boarding pass now. It's like, it's your wallet, it's your browser, it's your email machine. So many devices, all come to one. And that's why I think it's so popular, is because it's such a multifunctional device. And what Apple's doing with the iPad and the Mac right now, I think would be the equivalent of Apple saying, let's just make I don't know, they didn't do this because Steve Jobs was spearheading the project, but it'd be like if Apple said, let's just keep making iPods, and then we'll also make a phone. And then we can convince people to buy, an Apple flip phone, which has buttons, or, maybe even a QWERTY keyboard. If Apple went the BlackBerry route, we're going to make a smartphone, but then we'll also make iPods. That way the iPod can be the music device, and the BlackBerry Apple thing can be a smartphone, and then we'll also sell a designated camera. And we need to sell all three of these devices because that'll generate more revenue than if we tried to combine them all into one. When in reality, when you have one product that can do all of these things that's much more capable, people are willing to spend more money. And I think because the iPhone is capable of doing so many things at once, that's how Apple has mainstreamed and normalized the concept of, oh yeah, $1,000 for a new phone. Yeah, okay, I think I can justify that. People do it now, and they don't even think about it. You see, like freaking teenagers now with $1,000 iPhones because they're like, well, I mean, yeah, it does everything. So of course I'll spend some money on it. Whereas a few years ago, most people would never have spent more than a couple $100 on an iPod. iPod was like $200 to maybe $400. Good luck trying to sell people on like a $500 iPod. Maybe if you spec up the storage, it went way up there. But for the most part, iPods were like a couple $100. But now with the iPhone being a smartphone and a camera and all these other things, people are like, oh yeah, $1,000. Okay. Now that's like the most popular smartphone in the world is a phone that costs over $1,000 for the default storage. If we're factoring in the higher storage configurations, yeah, some people are spending $1,400 on phones. And because they use them so much, they can justify it because they do so much. And I think the same way, the iPad would probably, the equivalent, if we made an iPad Pro that was the equivalent spec of my MacBook Pro, you know, like it had a 16-inch display and it had a couple more Thunderbolt ports and it had a M3 Max chip in it inside it, it would probably cost more. I think the iPad spec for spec with the Max would be a more expensive product, but a bunch of people could probably justify it because of how capable it was. I don't have to carry around an iPad and a Mac now. I can just carry around one device, which I think it's personally easier to turn an iPad into a Mac than it would be to turn a Mac into an iPad. So I would just say, you know, keep the MacBooks for people who don't want a touchscreen or don't want Apple Pencil features. There's definitely a lot of people who are not interested in a two-in-one. There's definitely a lot of people that would just say, nah, I don't need all that. I just want a MacBook Air to get the, you know, Mac OS ecosystem going and my productivity apps, and I like a keyboard. And the Mac would still probably have better battery life. It could probably keep the legacy ports around for people who want HDMI and SD card slot. The battery could be physically bigger, so the battery life would probably be better. There'd be all these advantages to buying a Mac. Sure, it'd be cheaper than, like I said, than the iPad equivalent. But for those who want a two-in-one device, I think the iPad could be pretty substantial and disruptive, and that would be just such a cool product to imagine one thing that can do it all. And that's the reason I love my iPhone so much. It's one thing that can do it all. But Apple, I think, has this more traditional, less risky. I don't think Tim Cook is as bold as Steve was. Steve was always obsessed with the product, not so much the profit or the company. You know, he was more about just like really making a solid product that did everything he wanted it to do. And he probably, I don't know if he would have been interested in the iPad really taking over the Mac, but I just think if you're insistent that the iPad can't be more than, well, it's not meant to be a laptop, it's just meant to be, then I ask, okay, then why did you bring so many Mac features to the iPad? You know, why did you give it keyboard and trackpad support? Why did you give it larger size? Why did you give it a Mac chip? Why give it all of these Mac things while simultaneously saying, no, but it's not a Mac. So don't ask for it to do Mac-like stuff. I think if you're paying that much for a device with a screen that big, with a chip that fast, with keyboard and trackpad support, it should do everything the Mac can, in my opinion. I think that's dumb, which I've interacted with people that question this. They go, hey, look what the iPad can do now. They dock it with the keyboard case. Now you have this 13-inch display, you have a keyboard and a trackpad, you have an M-series chip, and someone goes, okay, can I use this for, I don't know what I'm doing right now. I'll use continuity camera and live stream off of OBS. No, it can't do that. Okay, can I put Final Cut on here and to access all the same features that my Mac has? No, it has the iPad version. Now you got to pay extra. It doesn't matter if you paid for Final Cut years ago and you've owned it and you can keep using it on your Mac for free. Now if you want to switch to the iPad, you have to start paying $5 a month for it. It's like, why? Why does that matter? Why? It's the exact same company. It's just a different form factor. I don't know. It'd be like I don't know. It'd be like kind of software locking features to the higher end iPhone, um, but something more basic. I don't know, like iMessage. It'd be like if you can only send certain iMessages, send certain effects for iMessage on the 15 Pro, but you couldn't do it on the regular 15. Trying to think of a better example. Um, they are differentiating the silicon now, and they do software lock features sometimes, but um, trying to think of a good. I mean, that doesn't make it okay, but like they could probably bring ProRes recording to the regular 15s. They just choose not to because they're not Pro, even though they have the silicon to support it, because we know the 13 Pros could do it. Um, Kevin, the software tester, says that doesn't surprise me. I think there's not a lot of demand for iPad, so there's less effort to bring features to the iPad. Yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity. I guess that's all I'm saying. Is like I think iPad sales would grow a lot. Maybe Mac sales would shrink a bit if they made the iPad Pro a bit more of a Pro, um, that was more capable, and they just fully unlocked the software to do everything a Mac can do. I think it should do everything a Mac can do and more. Um, but I think the revenue generated would be overall higher. I don't think it would kill the Mac, but it would increase iPad sales and specifically increase the higher price iPad sales. Apple doesn't break down the iPad revenue by model, but my guess is they have said that the cheapest iPad, like the $300 iPad, is still the best seller, which supports my argument. But I'd be willing to bet like 50 or 60% of iPad sales are for like the $300 one. The vast majority are buying the cheapest, most bare bones. And then another like 20 to 30% of sales are the iPad Air, which are mostly selling at $600. And then maybe after that, 10 or 15% is the iPad Mini. And then this tiny, tiny sliver of like 5%, 10% of iPad sales are actually the Pros, and most of them are just being used as, media entertainment devices. And some people just are like, well, it's an iPad with a nice display, and I can afford it, so I'll buy that one. But I think the iPad Pro sales could be much, much, much higher if the software could pick them up. But it's a dead horse. I've beat it to death. And I asked the Pro members what they wanted to talk about. I don't think Apple's thinking that the software is taking advantage of the silicon to its max capability, but I don't think that bothers them. I think Apple's perfectly content with hardware being overkill. It's like, yeah, you'll probably never max out the silicon in this device. We just built in some overhead. Now we can add more features or more capabilities in future software updates if we feel like it. But as we know, with the whole iOS team occasionally having to get iPadOS to catch up, it probably won't. But manufacturing efficiency helps them simplify everything. It's probably much, much easier for them to just throw an overkill chip in there, call it a day. They get some bragging rights because they get to say, wow, look how fast this M3 chip is. We put it in an iPad. Do you get to do anything with it? Rarely. But you get the marketing out of it. It sounds good, advertising wise, to be like, look at this incredible chip that we put into an iPad. Let's see. The $300 iPad can do 99% of the things the expensive options can do. Yeah, pretty much. It's all just execution. Which, I've heard people argue that. Like, it's not like the MacBook Air uh, can't do the same software things that a high-end MacBook Pro could do, right? It's mainly just the MacBook Pros do them better with better hardware, and they do them faster because they have better cooling and better chips. But yeah, I guess the port difference is a bit more noticeable. So the MacBook Pros have more port selection than the MacBook Air. Whereas an iPad Pro, okay, it has a Thunderbolt port, and the $400 iPad has a USB 2.0 port. But yeah, the hardware differences don't unlock a ton more. LiDAR, wow. Would I ever review the Brick? It's a small 3D printed small button thing that blocks certain apps or websites from your phone, and you can unlock them by holding the small thing near the iPhone. Never heard of that. That sounds interesting, but kind of gimmicky. Again, I'm an essentialist, so if I don't absolutely need a piece of hardware, I prefer to get rid of it. Only reason I have the Apple boxes on my wall is for you guys. If I was not recording tech videos, and a couple of years ago I tried to do a video where I just got rid of all the Apple boxes. I wanted it to be clean and minimal, so I just had like a basic white background, and people didn't like it. Honestly, I thought, oh, you'll get over it, but it was like weeks later, and people were like, oh man, your setup looks so much worse and so much more boring without the boxes. So I was like, okay, I'll keep some of the boxes. I got rid of most of them. I got rid of the duplicates, and now I just keep the ones on my wall. There's not really any more than the ones that are up there. But for the most part, I've felt like over time, especially when you move, stuff kind of just weighs you down. So if I don't absolutely need something, I either sell it or give it away or don't buy it in the first place. But that's an interesting concept, blocking certain apps and websites unless you hold it down. I mean, a Mac is like 8K, and an iPad is what, 3K? It depends on the Mac. I mean, the problem is the Macs that are 8,000 have way fancier NANDs and specs that the iPad wouldn't. My point is, if you spec match iPads with Macs, usually the iPad is more expensive. Like a MacBook Air, for example. Can we do this? Drew is not a collector. I used to be, but I started realizing how annoying it is to be a collector. Let's play with the configurator a little bit. So, if I wanted an iPad Pro that's the same size with the same storage as a MacBook Air, spec for spec, we got to do 12.9 inches, right? Space gray. Oh, they still have 128 gig. So to get it, like a MacBook, I got to do 256 gig with Wi-Fi. And a MacBook comes with, a keyboard case. So we'll add the Magic Keyboard, whichever. White is fine. Yeah, we don't need the trade-in. Now it's $1,500 to get a 13-inch iPad with a keyboard with the same storage, $1,550, and that's without a pencil, right? That's without a cell plan. That's just the same size and storage as a MacBook Air, which we all know that a MacBook Air, if you want the exact same chip, is actually $1,000. So it's $500 less. But if you want the M3, it's $1,100. So spec for spec, the iPad is more expensive, and there's still advantages to the Air, mind you. I mean, the Air doesn't have as good a display, but it does have 2 Thunderbolt ports instead of 1. Still has a headphone jack, if you care about that. It has a much better battery life. The aluminum enclosure, usually for the keyboard and trackpad, ages better than the Folio keyboard case. So that's what I mean by iPads, when you spec match them with MacBooks, are typically more expensive. What do you think of Dual OS for iPad? I don't know what Dual OS is, but if it's your idea of, docked with the keyboard, Mac OS, and I'd just say switch. Let the consumer decide which one they want to use. This doesn't require side loading. This doesn't require alt stores or anything. This would literally just be, we know Mac OS runs on the M series of chips. Mac OS is owned and designed by Apple. Just put the same OS that you put in your Mac on the iPad. To me, that's not that crazy, but the iPad doesn't know what it is. iPads are great for kids, but that's it. It really feels like that, especially when everyone was like, bring Xcode to the iPad. This hardware is super capable. It's beautiful. I love carrying around the iPad with me. I love the Apple Pencil. It would be great if I could run Xcode and write software on my iPad. People were asking for that for years, and then Apple gives us Swift playgrounds. Literally playground. How much more smack in the face, this is for kids, can you get than everybody asking for Xcode, so Apple gives us playground? Okay, have your fun little pretend iPad experience. You can pretend like you're a grown-up, but then one day you buy a real computer, which is a Mac. Elizabeth says, I'm skeptical how good macOS on iPad would be based on your review of the M2 Air, the Lost podcast. Didn't it overheat? Yeah, the M2 chip did have overheating problems, but I think macOS is capable of running on much, much, slower machines. I mean, that was more of a silicon problem than anything. The M2 Air, hardware-wise, had a much smaller heatsink than the M1 Air. And I know the iPad has some smaller, but it would just be a throttled performance experience, I guess. But Mac OS is still capable of running on a handful of Intel MacBooks, which are much slower. Um, so I think that the Mac OS experience might be throttled a bit compared to a Mac, sure, but I don't think it would be necessarily like impossible. Um, I still use my 8th gen iPad, to be honest. I'm not upgrading until the one I have breaks. Yeah, I feel like that's most people with iPads. Very little reason to upgrade them, and that's likely why the sales have gone down so much. Just wondering, what kind of RCS do you think will come to the iPhone, and do you think we'll hear something about it in Apple's big June event? Probably, because it's software related, so I assume that will be just part of the feature set. Google, I don't know if they know something, but Google's own website says that Apple is getting RCS support in the fall. Apple didn't give us much of a timeline. They only said that we're getting RCS in 2024. They didn't really say when. Google claims in the fall, which is probably just a safe assumption. I don't know if Apple told Google when it's happening, but it would make a lot of sense to me that RCS support would just be part of the iOS 18 feature list. So it's included with iOS 18. I don't know that much about how many different versions of RCS there are. My guess is Apple's probably not going to choose the one that everybody wants them to choose, but it is still a form of RCS. It might not be the most encrypted, safe version, but it will still technically bring all of the RCS features like the message reactions and the higher quality messages and pictures and videos actually sending and group chat features. So yeah, I believe it's just going to be an iOS 18 thing. Um, I like the dual OS idea. I think that's just called dual booting. Macs used to do that. I think they still do that. If you're on Intel, you can boot up Windows straight off your Mac, and that's owned by a completely different company. And Apple was okay with that, which is why I'm kind of like, hey. Also, wouldn't this satisfy a lot of the EU and federal government's complaints about sideloading at alt stores? If they let you dual boot Mac OS onto the iPad, they could technically say, okay, the iPad supports sideloading in alt stores. It's just through macOS, not through iOS, which is kind of a loophole that I feel like Apple would like, because then they don't have to mess around with, making sure this is capable on iOS. And like we've talked about, macOS could be, as a dual boot option, could be restricted to just the iPad Pros. It could be just available on M1 iPads. Or even if we're worried about the heatsink issues, it could be just available on M2 or M3 iPads. That way, most iPads, which are selling in the $300, $400 realm, they can't sideload. They can't support alt stores because they don't support dual booting. But Apple can still technically say in court that, oh yeah, no, iPads support sideloading, even if they're just talking about their highest, most expensive. So now the law has to get a lot more technical, and it probably doesn't fix all of the government prosecution against them, but it delays it. It makes it harder for them to prosecute, because now the government can't say that iPads don't support sideloading in alt stores, but they will have to get more specific that, okay, well, we want all iPads to support sideloading in alt stores, not just the Pros, which when you get more specific like that, it takes longer. And, it would be in Apple's favor, I feel like, if they said, because in case you missed it, Mac OS lets you download software and lets you use different launchers and stuff that are not from the Mac OS App Store. So you bring that to the iPad, you can technically say, okay, there's technically a way to do this on the iPad. Only the iPad mini knows what its purpose is, which is why it's the only iPad I still use somewhat regularly. I agree. If you're just focusing on, I want a small, not quite a laptop, but I want a bigger touchscreen than my phone with a nice stylus, and I can draw and take notes on it. iPad mini is affordable. It's got Apple Pencil 2 support, which is, in my opinion, the only Apple Pencil that should exist. And it's for iPad OS's limitations, that hardware fits it well. Dual OS takes up a lot of space if they don't up base storage. It didn't really on the Mac. They used to ship Macs with dual boot capabilities that had 128 gigs of storage. Also, I'm not saying you can't software lock it. That might help you sell more iPads if you say dual boot is only available on iPads that have 256 gigs of storage. Or you could go higher. You could say dual booting is only possible on iPads with a terabyte. We need the additional RAM because iPad puts more RAM in the 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte iPads. So if you just said Mac OS as a dual boot option is on the iPads with a terabyte of storage, that would be better than what we have now. It would, we'd have a new set of complaints that, oh my God, Apple wants me to spend all this money to get dual boot Mac OS. It's like, okay, that's annoying, but it's still better than now, which is, still being fundamentally limited by this crippled OS that doesn't get much attention on a, $2,000 device. I would say, yeah, as long as there's a way to do it, it doesn't have to be the most economical. But if it only works on 1 terabyte iPads, you definitely don't have to worry about Mac cannibalization. Just trying to justify iPads that cost that much is kind of ridiculous. Dual booting on 128 gig is awful. I agree, but Apple lets you do it, is my point. So if your argument is they shouldn't let you do it because it would be an inferior experience, it didn't stop you before. Drew, if you had to quit either your tech channel or EV channel, which one would you quit? Oh, this one in a heartbeat. Sorry. No question. You could argue I've already quit on this channel. It's just EV space is just infinitely more interesting. All of the things I'm talking about with the iPad, I've probably already said in a previous live stream or podcast. Whereas the EV community is constantly exploring and trying to do new things. And there's a laundry list of video topics to dive into and subjects to talk about. Whereas with this field, there's increasingly less to talk about in terms of technology because it's just iteration upon iteration. A lot of big companies that don't want to try anything too different or too risky. That's really what we're all complaining about here with the iPad identity crisis, is that the iPad could do so much more, but because Apple plays things way too safe, they just want the iPad to keep being what it is. It's a note taker, it's a media consumption device, and an artistry tool, and that's it. We don't want to go beyond that. But electric vehicle space is infinitely more interesting to me. There's far more things to talk about. There's far more noticeable changes to document. The car market is down. I wouldn't say the EV craze is dying out. It's just like the number of people, especially when interest rates are as high as they are. Dealerships are getting slammed, gas or electric, by the way. Typically when interest rates are high, people don't spend as much money on cars. But it hasn't changed the fact that there's a lot of talk or a lot of interest in what the EV space is going to look like. How do you manage the shrinking demand? But it's not just buyers. There's also just EV fans and EV enthusiasts, that kind of thing. I think that if Google knows something, then the green bubbles, they just default to Google Messages, though an extension in the blue bubbles will just stay iMessage. I honestly don't understand the obsession with the colors. I guess a lot of people just think that iMessage bullying will continue as long as they use the green bubble, but I don't think it's a software problem. I think it's just a people problem that everyone's assuming is a tech problem. It's like, if there's someone who's going to make fun of you for not having an iPhone or pressure you for not having an iPhone, they're going to do that regardless of what color the message is. There's always going to be some feature that is not there because you don't have an iPhone. It could be the payments, it could be the animations, it could be the FaceTime button. Whatever the noticeable feature is that indicates that you don't own an iPhone, someone's going to bully you regardless. It's not like the bullies are just going to suddenly stop if the color of the message changes. That doesn't make sense. Do I think people should buy the iPad Pro M1 now? Not really. There's very few people that I think should buy an iPad unless for a very specific reason. It depends. What do you want to use it for, I guess, would be my question. And arguably, yeah, I think that depending on what software features or hardware features Apple showcases for us, it's very likely that a refurbished second-hand M1 iPad Pro will probably be cheaper and be a better deal and give you 95% of the same experience. And will you notice that additional 5% by spending the extra $300? Probably. Green bubble. Oh, you are an Android user. It could be. It doesn't have to be that. You could be texting someone and not have the FaceTime button, or not have the iMessage contact photo or banner. The green bubble is not inherently the problem. It's someone who wants to shame you for not buying a particular brand, which is messed up. And I would say don't be friends with that person, or they're not a reasonable person anyway. The main reason I have a hard time getting behind this whole, oh, Apple's encouraging bullying or something, is that so many of my family members use Android, and many of my friends still use Android, and never once have we had an issue with texting them. It's like, oh, the pictures don't look as good over SMS, just send them over Messenger. And then everybody just uses Messenger. Or, if iMessage isn't enough for you, then you go to Instagram DMs, or you go to Snapchat, or you go to Telegram, or like the rest of the world, you go to WhatsApp. It's just a reasonable person is not going to shame you for the device you have. An unreasonable bully is going to continue to be an unreasonable bully no matter how easy you make it for them to text you back and forth. It's not about what Apple does. It's about the kind of people in your life that would actually treat you differently based on the product you use. Um, do you ever wish that the Tailosive network wasn't several channels, but just one Tailosive channel? Um, for management of content, no, it would be more complicated. It honestly used to be one channel, and I tried to do everything on one channel. But then you get one type of audience member expecting one type of content, and a different audience member expecting a different type of content, and then the comments get all intermixed. So from a content management point of view, it is actually much easier to have separate channels. Um, it's kind of like how it's nice to have separate rooms in your house. I mean, technically, you could make it like a studio and have your stove and your shower and your bed and your living room and your TV and your toilet. You could technically have no walls and have a much more open floor plan, but you start to quickly realize, like, oh, I don't really like having all of these separate, having everything open all the time. You don't want to crap where you eat. You can figure out which channel is the toilet and which channel is the kitchen. Teens will be teens, exactly. I don't think the elimination of the green bubble would fix that. Green bubbles versus blue is the more childish debate ever. We are living with grown adults acting like kids. Yeah, I agree. And I don't think that Apple changing the color would fix that. There's always going to be some feature that exposes the fact that you don't have an iPhone. You think all the bullies will suddenly just love you and stop complaining if you're a blue bubble? I don't think so. Um, shouldn't we have an option to have all the messages the same color? Hate the green color. Sure, I'd say any color you want. That's what Messenger does. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Meta, but I gotta be honest, the Messenger app is pretty useful. I don't like that they changed the search button into a Meta AI button, though. My wife was complaining about that recently. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's not going to be a perfect messaging app. We have our complaints with iMessage, and we'll have our complaints with Messenger. But actually, whenever I'm sending photos or videos, I tend to use Messenger because Messenger will host the pictures and videos within that app for free forever. And if you send pictures and videos through iMessage, it counts against your iCloud storage if you have iCloud messages. And if you don't, then it counts towards your device storage. So Messenger doesn't do either of those things. So whenever I'm sending large pictures or videos, I'll switch over to Messenger, which, it'd be nice. I understand how many of us may want the federal government to mandate and require a perfect messaging app that does everything we've ever wanted, but it's just probably not feasible. It's probably not practical. It might make a lot more sense to just switch between messaging apps even though it's more complicated and it's more annoying, at least for me, it's a lot more economical to just switch to the messaging app that's going to result in the least amount of cloud storage or device storage being filled up. If we make everybody use iMessage and Apple counts all of your iMessage photos and videos towards your iCloud storage, then okay, now everybody has to pay more for iCloud storage. Is that the future you want? Yeah, I know. The Meta AI thing is infuriating. But at the same time, they are providing a pretty capable, pretty flexible messaging service with unlimited photo and video sending capabilities. And they host those pictures and video. I can go to the texts that I have, my text history with my wife on Facebook Messenger, and go to the view media and pictures and scroll back. Every photo and video I've ever sent my wife even before we were married, before we were even dating, and I was in the friend zone, and it was just me and her texting as friends. I can scroll back and see all those pictures. Meta has hosted them on their servers for free. That's pretty handy. So no wonder they're trying to turn the app into some kind of revenue stream, because they probably lose a bunch of money on it, right? So it's frustrating when they do things we don't like, but at the same time, I do appreciate that service, so I'm going to keep using it. And the reason I brought up the Messenger app is they let you change the color of the bubbles to any color you want. You can have it. When I text my parents, it's a yellow bubble. When I text some of my friends, it's red. When I text other people, family members, it's blue. Certain family members, it's purple. You can pick and choose. It can be a gradient, so that when the messages are at the bottom of the chat, they're more blue, and when they're at the top, they're more purple. You can change it to whatever you want, and the bullying would still persist. Teens will be teens. Do I think the EU will allow side-loading apps, that there will allow alternative texting apps like Google Messages coming to the iPhone and have a setting so you can make it your texting app? Yeah, I was gonna say you can have other texting apps already. It's just making it the default so you control it through voice. Yeah, that sounds like something the EU would want to enforce, because that's the kind of non-compete or too competitive advantage that Apple has. Is like, oh, you can only use one voice assistant, you can't set it to a different one, in one messaging app, which actually I plan on talking about that in my next video, as to what Apple can do about the fact that we might just have to accept that Apple's not going to have a ton of software advantages, like locking down everybody to have to use the iMessage app, or you have to use Siri, or that kind of thing. And if they end up losing all of these software advantages, or the Apple Watch works with any phone, and any Android watch has to work and have feature parity with the Apple Watch when you pair it. Let's ignore the debate on whether or not they should be forced to do that. Let's just assume they lose all these court cases. What can Apple do to handle it? And what that looks like in the future if Apple does not have any ecosystem advantages. But you pay with your data. Free actually means that you are the product. Meta privacy does not exist, in my opinion. I mean, if you want to accuse them of fraud, they do technically say that WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. I believe they've expanded that to Facebook Messenger as well. I mean, has that ever come back to bite you? Have you ever been in court of law and someone said, oh, we pulled your Facebook messages here? I mean, I agree. I think digital privacy as a whole is a myth. Like, from the off-the-record conversations I've had with multiple people, I have both family members and friends that work in government security. And from what I've heard, I can't reveal everything, but from what I've heard, if you have secrets that you want to keep from the government, do not keep those secrets on any electronic device that is capable of accessing the internet. I don't think you're really going to achieve digital privacy by just using the right apps at the right place at the right time. It's like, it's the government can find their way through anything. Remember the whole FBI story where they went to Apple and they asked Apple to open the iPhone, and Apple said, no, we're not going to open it. The end of that story was the FBI found another way in. That's a perfect analogy of how this whole digital privacy thing works. Apple stands by what they believe is the right thing. They get some street cred for it, but then the government found another way in anyway. It didn't stop them. They wanted a quicker, faster solution that Apple didn't provide them, but it didn't stop them from finding a solution. In the end, the government will find their way in. Scott, thank you for the super chat. He says, just to say hi. Wow, that was totally unnecessary, but thank you very much. iPadOS doesn't have side loading. It's sad that this OS is so bad. Well, it's because it's on the surface, it's branded differently, but under the hood, it's basically just iOS. It's iOS on a bigger screen. In reality, there's not a big difference. A guide to digital security. Step 1, don't. Yeah, there were even big VPN services that they were like, oh, this helps secure your data. And then they get hacked and breached, and then it turns out that they weren't actually securing your data. Same thing with password manager apps. I've kind of given up on the whole concept. I believe that if you have secrets or things that a government should be worried about or that they could use against you, then they're gonna find it. Like I don't think digital privacy is really a thing. The only comforting thought that I would echo to people who are concerned about privacy is the sheer amount of connected devices and the sheer amount of people now prevents the concept that there are individual humans listening in on everything you're doing. There's just not physically possible. There's like billions of people with smartphones and only so many people that can work for the federal government and actually be spying on people. Probably less than 100,000 people that are in charge of, like, the whole wiretapping concept or tuning in to what's being said, what's being communicated. And there's hundreds of millions of us all talking and using our phones and texting constantly. So there's not going to be a human listening in on every single thing you're doing unless there's some kind of, algorithm that is searching for key phrases, key words that set off little alarms like, oh, what is this person planning? What is this person plotting? Are they going to, come after us? Or are they planning some kind of attack? When those kinds of phrases go off, it probably sets off some internal algorithm, and then they come after you and then they start monitoring you. But if you don't really have anything to hide, I don't think there's going to be a person listening in on everything you're doing. As I said, just accept that everybody has access to your data. If you don't like it, don't use any electronic device. Pretty much. I mean, I can't say everything I've heard because I do have friends that work in government security and family members that have been working in government security for a long, long time, and they've told me things that are like, there's not much hope for that. There's not much hope for you having much privacy on your phone. So if you have something that can be used against you, that's a concern. But a lot of people are like, well, I don't have anything to hide. I just, it's the same reason that I wear clothes to cover up. It's about little privacy. It's like you just don't want another person on the other end listening in. Well, that's why I tell you, if you don't have anything to hide, there probably isn't someone listening in on you. Doesn't mean they can't wiretap or tune in or start monitoring you if they want to, but if you don't give them a reason to, they're not going to, is my point. The government would use AI to listen to millions of calls. Yeah, which we already have AI listening to our stuff and analyzing our photos all the time. But I don't think most people are as bothered by that. The main reason people are concerned about, I would like to think, the main reason most people are concerned about privacy and security is not because they're, terrorists. I don't think that's why everybody buys iPhones, is because they have these big plans to attack the government. It's mainly just because they don't like the idea. They feel uncomfortable with the idea that someone could be spying on them. Another individual could be looking into them. The idea of an algorithm that's looking for phrases or words that trigger, a certain red flag on a system, that probably doesn't bother people as much. I don't think they're as worried about being scanned by like a faceless, computer. But yeah, they use algorithms to monitor everything. They need. Please read my comment. Is it possible new iPad Pro will come with M3 Pro or Max chip? Very unlikely, I would say, just due to the thermal limitations of the size. The new iPad Pros are rumored to be the thinnest. I think the thinnest Apple product, I should say Apple electronic, because everyone goes, what about the Apple Card? The Apple Card is thinner. Okay, God. It's a credit card. We shouldn't count that. But anyway, the thinnest Apple electronic device ever is probably getting unveiled at the Let Loose event, because the rumored specifications are that the new iPad Pro is 5.0 millimeters thin. That makes it thinner than any iPod. Yeah, even thinner than the iPod Shuffles. It's nuts. And when you try to fit a silicon in there, it's going to be very thermally constrained. So I don't think that they would put an even faster chip in there that's going to heat up more, especially because the iPads pretty much have never had any kind of active cooling system. They don't have spinning fans on the inside. So I don't think they would put an M3 Pro or an M3 Max in there. Because apps like Google Messages as your default replacement for iMessage apps like you can on Android, and is just frustrating, has Samsung just switched over to Google Messages. Um, yeah, I think Google has not had a great track record with messaging apps either, though. They've had dozens of messaging apps, and but you can say Google Messages should be the default, but then there's still going to be a bunch of people that use WhatsApp and a bunch of people that use Messenger. It's kind of like messaging apps are kind of like social medias. It's very hard to get people to switch once they're comfortable with one, which I actually think might be a funny unintended consequence of all these government crackdowns. I actually think even if Apple lost all of their ecosystem advantages, let's say iMessage is now on Android for free. You can switch your iPhone to the Google Assistant. The Apple Watch is compatible with all phones, and all Android watches are compatible with iPhones and Androids. You can open up the walled garden. You can knock down all those walls. And I bet a bunch of people would probably still keep buying iPhones simply because it's what they're used to and it's what they're comfortable with. And the brand power now that Apple has really ingrained into a lot of people, they're just like, I just want an iPhone because my iPhone is the easiest thing to transfer my data to. I know my password for my Apple ID. If I switch to Android, the menus and the home screen is just going to be a little bit different, and I'm going to have to make a Samsung account if I buy a Galaxy, or I'm going to have to remember my Google password again. And what's my Google password again? You know, the confusion involved with switching, even if all of the walled garden barriers are knocked down. AirDrop is now on everything, all that. I bet a bunch of people would still keep buying iPhones. Apple's probably worried. They think they're going to lose their competitive advantage. I actually don't think they would lose that much. I think a lot of people keep buying iPhones for not really any particular reason other than it's just what they're comfortable with. Whereas Apple probably thinks, oh no, they buy the iPhone for the security and the simplicity of how it works with only other Apple products. And it's like, I don't think everybody cares about that, honestly. Telegram is huge outside the US. That's true. Yeah, the bend gate is going to be pretty bad on the new iPad Pro. I think the main reason they're making it so thin is because the new Magic Keyboard case that they have planned to launch alongside it is probably going to be fairly thick and heavy, heavier than before. And they know most people are going to be buying keyboard cases with their iPad. Most people are probably not going to be buying the iPad Pro caseless and not buying any accessories for it. I know my password for my Apple ID. I can assure you about 50% of iPhone owners don't. They definitely don't have it memorized, but yeah, I agree, Dylan. It helps when people are able to just hold their iPhone next to another older iPhone and just sync everything over really quick. Thank you, Darson, for subscribing to Tailosive Tech Plus. Really appreciate your guys' support. I don't like the Samsung menu. Funny that I actually like the LG user interface, but they don't make phones anymore. Isn't it funny how, like, usually the coolest companies die out? Apple let me switch my default video chat app from FaceTime to Google Duo, and I've been able to video chat people from iPhone to Android. Very easy. Why can't you do the same with texting? I don't know. I wish you could. It's not up to me. But it sounds like the EU might make them. I'm thinking about buying the new iPad for streaming games all in one. I have a monitor. Could this work? That could work with any iPad, probably. I don't know why you think you need the new iPad. I would... Game streaming? I mean, cloud gaming, I guess they're opening that up now. They're letting emulators and cloud gaming on the App Store. Is that here in the US too? I don't know. I'm not a gamer. I haven't been following it very closely. Buy your mom an iPhone. That's right. Given the fact that it's funny, Randy called me earlier. I wonder if that was a... Oh, he says, I didn't know you were streaming. He never texted me, so I assume... There he is. I assume that was either accidental. It sounds like it wasn't accidental. He just wanted to catch up. But you should have known. You should have known, man. I'm live. But yeah, Wyatt B. Surprise. The EV channel is called Tailosive EV. What a creative title. What a unique name. Actually, I kind of wish I had chosen a more creative name. Now I just feel like the more important thing with my branding is just consistency. It's like, it's been Tailosive for a long time. I should probably just keep it as that. But in hindsight, I would have picked a different name. It's too late to change now. It's like Apple can't change their name, even though they don't sell apples. Okay. They limit the texting apps to only being messaging apps, so you can't connect your cell phone number to other texting apps except for the iMessage app. Is that right? Then how come Messenger asks me to sync with my phone number every time I open Messenger? It's like, add your phone number to Messenger. What is that all about? What is that? He needs that Drew guidance. Okay, maybe I should wrap up the live stream here. I want to talk to Randy. I haven't heard from him in a while. Quick recap on what you talked about today. Only just joined. The main reason I think people are not too excited slash preemptively disappointed about the iPad event is because it's probably going to be all about hardware, and no one cares about how good the iPad hardware gets anymore because people just want the software to get better. And I think that's the identity crisis, is that you can't make the iPad software better without turning it into something that it's not. Or should I answer the call on the stream, Randy? You tell me. Should Randy join us? Maybe he should call us on Discord and we'll talk. Having been an iPad Pro user for 2 years now, I realized I kind of suck at everything that's not illustration slash streaming, which is amazing. Yeah, I think that's the other problem, is that if the software doesn't change much, it's very difficult for people to justify upgrading their iPads, right? So people just hold on to their iPads for longer. Like my wife still has a 2017 iPad Pro and has no intention, I think, on ever upgrading it, honestly. She'll probably use it until... She mainly uses it as a book. She likes to read books on it. She doesn't really use it for media consumption. Is a book media? I guess a book is kind of... You know, she doesn't use it for movies and TV shows. She doesn't scroll social media on there, but she just likes having a... She basically treats it like a Kindle. And also she likes having an AirDrop connected... It's my old iPad Pro. I still call it hers because she actually bought it from me before we were married. So, once we got married and, we're all living together now, what's mine is yours. We all share stuff, but I don't touch it. I don't use it. It has lightning, so I'm allergic to it. But she bought it before we were married, and it has 512 gigs of storage, and she likes having a big tablet to store all of her pictures and videos on if her phone ever gets full up. Normally I would say absolutely, but this is a behind the scenes question and need guidance. Next time we'll do it on stream. It'll make sense. Okay. Well, I've been live for a while, so we might have to wrap it up here because I miss Randy and I haven't talked to him for a while. I want to talk. Hi, Sora. Apple only allows you to communicate with other people on Facebook Messenger using Facebook Messenger. They limit the cell carriers from you as a general texting app. Interesting. Even if they let me, I don't think I would want my phone number in there. I want a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, but I don't want to pay for another Magic Keyboard again. Here. I'm totally with you, except for the part about wanting a 12.9-inch. Why do you need a... You could technically use your cell phone number, so you can use a cell signal instead of Wi-Fi, but it won't act as an actual texting app. Sounds awfully specific, because you can still text through it, so I'm a little confused. But anyway, I appreciate the super chats and the channel members. Thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, I agree with Freakwaka. iPads are just bigger phones. I already have an iPhone Pro Max and a Max, so why do I need an iPad? I don't even have a Pro Max. I just wanted a mini iPhone. I fell in love with the mini iPhone size. And I couldn't get a smaller USB-C iPhone, so I got the 15 Pro. 6.1 inches is plenty big for me, and I watch videos and I make all my video thumbnails on my phone. It's a great hardware. I honestly want to see how long I can get it to last me, but I always jinx myself, I feel like, whenever I commit to, I want to keep this for a long time. But hey, I'm coming up on 3 years with my MacBook. If the software gets better, I want a new iPad mini. Randy's stealing me officially, guys. It's over. It's all his fault. No, actually, it's lunchtime. I got to eat something anyway. We've been live for a while. Thank you, Transmagnify, for saying great to hear your thoughts. That means a lot to me. It means, it's so humbling and so nice of you guys when you're supporting directly or you're just watching with your time. But it also means so much to me that there's people that are just like, I want to hear what you have to say. It's Seriously, thank you guys for keeping me company, making this a dream job. And I have another video for you in the works that talks a lot more about Meta. It's not about tablets, but we're going to be talking about how Meta is declaring all-out war on Apple when it comes to the mixed reality / spatial computing space, whatever you want to call it. Always fun to hear from you guys, and look forward to seeing how these new iPads are going to disappoint us all over again. This is the most disappointing iPad we've ever made. I come to you because you usually have all the answers. I feel like that's never true, but thank you. Take care, all. Bye-bye. Have a good one.